The void screamed with the sound of 10,000 engines as the armada emerged from the Eye of Terror, their hulls painted black as the grave, trimmed in gold that gleamed like funeral offerings to forgotten gods. At their head sailed the Vengeful Spirit, flagship of legends and nightmares, bearing upon its command throne the architect of humanity's longest war. This was not the first time such darkness had spilled from the wound in reality, nor would it be the last, but each emergence carried with it the weight of her inevitability, the certainty that one day the black tide would finally drown the stars. The Black Legion had become more than warriors. They had become the promise of entropy itself, the face that chaos showed to a galaxy desperately clinging to order. Yet this preeminence was not inherited but forged through blood and betrayal, shaped by a single figure's refusal to accept defeat as final. The transformation from the broken remnants of the Sons of Horus into the most feared force in the galaxy represents one of the most remarkable military and ideological reconstructions in the history of the Imperium's long decline. Understanding how the Black Legion achieved this dominance requires examining not just victories on distant battlefields, but the careful cultivation of power, the manipulation of rival forces, and the creation of an identity that transcended the failures of the past while weaponizing them toward future conquest. The story begins not with triumph, but with the ashes of humiliation in the aftermath of the greatest rebellion the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Lunar Wolves had once been the exemplar of everything the Emperor's Great Crusade represented. Born as in the Legion on Terror itself, they fought at the Emperor's side during the earliest campaigns to unite humanity under a single banner. Their reputation for ruthless efficiency combined with tactical brilliance made them the preferred choice for the most critical engagements. When their Primarch Horus was discovered, they reached heights of glory that made them the envy of every other legion. Horus Lupercal, the War Master, the favoured son, the one chosen to lead the Emperor's armies while the Master of Mankind pursued more esoteric goals. The renaming from Lunar Wolves to Sons of Horus reflected not just honour, but the personal bond between the Emperor and his most trusted son. The Ulanor Crusade stood as the pinnacle of their achievements. The campaign against the Orc Overlord Erlak Erg showcased everything that made Horus exceptional as a commander. While other legions engaged in diversionary attacks across the Ulanor sector's outlying worlds, Horus executed a devastating surprise assault directly onto the Orc capital world. His first company Terminators teleported straight into Erlak Erg's palace complex, with Horus himself leading 10 elite warriors against the Overlord and his 40-strong retinue. The battle was savage beyond measure, and when it ended, only one Terminator besides Horus remained standing. That lone survivor was Ezekiel Abaddon, first captain, and the brutality of that engagement would shape his understanding of warfare for the next 10,000 years. The Emperor declared Ulanor the greatest victory of the Great Crusade and bestowed upon Horus the unprecedented title of War Master, granting him supreme military command of all Imperial forces. It should have been the beginning of an age of unification and prosperity. Instead, it marked the first steps toward the galaxy's darkest hour. Horus's corruption came gradually, seeded through the warrior lodges that the Lunar Wolves had adopted from the people of Davin. These fraternities, innocent in their original intent, provided the perfect vehicle for manipulation. Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, exploited these secretive gatherings to plant doubts about the Emperor's true intentions. When Horus was mortally wounded on Davin, it was Abaddon who agreed with Erebus's suggestion to take the War Master to the Serpent Lodge for healing, unknowingly setting in motion the events that would tear the Imperium apart. The Horus who emerged from the Davinite temple was changed, his mind poisoned against the Emperor, his ambition now turned toward conquest and godhood rather than unity. The Horus heresy that followed was the most catastrophic civil war in human history. 9 Space Marine legions turned against their creator, and for 9 years the galaxy burned. Horus carved a bloody path toward terror itself, and the Sons of Horus led the traitor legions with savage pride. Abaddon was granted the honour of leading the assault on the Emperor's palace, and in that moment the Sons of Horus stood at the absolute zenith of their power. Never again would the Legion gather in such strength, never again would they command such resources, never again would they fight with such unified purpose. But Horus fell. The Emperor struck him down in single combat aboard the Vengeful Spirit, though the Master of Mankind was himself mortally wounded in the exchange. With their Primarch dead, The Sons of Horus were the first traitor legion to flee from Terra, abandoning their allies to save themselves. This act of cowardice earned them the eternal hatred of every other traitor legion. The Word-bearers who had orchestrated the heresy, the World-eaters who had bled themselves dry in the assault, the Death Guard who had endured horrors beyond imagination, all of them watched the Sons of Horus run and marked them as oath-breakers and failures. The retreat into the Eye of Terror should have been the end of the Legion's story. They had lost their Primarch, lost the war, lost their honour. The Sons of Horus established themselves on the demon world of Maleum, but without Horus to hold them together, the Legion began to fracture. Different warlords pursued their own agendas, old grudges surfaced and discipline collapsed. The collective trauma of defeat combined with exposure to the raw energies of the warp eroded what remained of their cohesion. They became targets for the other traitor legions, objects of mockery and revenge. The Emperor's children, in particular, seemed determined to heap further humiliation upon their former brothers. The Thus Legion had fully embraced Slaanesh, descending into excess and depravity that made them unrecognisable as the proud warriors they had once been. In a calculated insult, they raided Maleum and stole the corpse of Horus himself. For Fabius Biel, the mad apothecary of the Emperor's children, the body represented a prize beyond measure. He intended to clone the War Master, to create a new Horus who might lead the traitor legions to victory, or perhaps simply to demonstrate his own genius. Ezekiel Abaddon, first captain of the Sons of Horus, watched his legion disintegrate. The shame of their retreat from Terra weighed heavily upon the survivors, and without purpose or strong leadership they broke apart easily. Different companies pursued different masters. Some pledged themselves fully to individual chaos gods, seeking power through devotion. Others became mercenaries, fighting for whoever could offer them resources or opportunities for revenge. The legion that had once been the War Master's own became scattered remnants, despised by their fellow traitors and haunted by their failure. But Abaddon did not accept this fate as permanent. Where others saw only the wreckage of broken dreams, Abaddon perceived potential. The Sons of Horus had failed because they had fought for Horus, and Horus had proven fallible. The War Master had been corrupted by the Chaos Gods, had become their puppet, and in doing so had lost the clarity of purpose that had made him great. Abaddon understood what so many others failed to grasp. The Chaos Gods offered power, but that power came with strings, came with demands that ultimately enslaved those who accepted it too completely. Horus had become a tool of forces beyond his control, and that weakness had cost him everything. Abaddon would not make the same mistake. His disappearance from Maleum sparked rumours throughout the Eye of Terror. Some believed he had died, unable to bear the shame of defeat. Others thought he had pledged himself to one of the dark gods and been transformed beyond recognition. The truth was both simpler and more ambitious. Abaddon had taken the vengeful spirit, Horus's flagship, and ventured deep into the Eye of Terror, searching for power but refusing to bow to any single master. He studied the nature of chaos itself, learning how to draw upon the gifts of all four ruinous powers without surrendering his will to any of them. It was a dangerous path, one that destroyed lesser beings who attempted it, but Abaddon had been forged in the crucible of the heresy. He possessed the strength of will to walk between the fires without being consumed. The turning point came when Falcus Kibra found him. The former Justaerin captain, nicknamed Widowmaker, had been searching the Eye of Terror for any sign of his first captain. When he finally located the vengeful spirit drifting in the Immaterium, he found Abaddon changed. The first captain had become something more, had developed a vision for what the Sons of Horus could become. Not a legion bound by the name of a failed Primarch, not warriors fighting for the glory of gods they didn't truly serve, but something new entirely. Abaddon revealed his plan to Kibra and the warriors who had accompanied him. They would destroy the clone of Horus that Fabius Biel had created. They would assault the Emperor's children's fortress of Canticle City, take back what had been stolen, and in doing so demonstrate that the Sons of Horus were no longer the broken force that had fled Terra. But more than that, they would abandon the name that had become synonymous with failure and shame. They would be reborn in black and gold, would forge a new identity that rejected the past while claiming its rightful place as heirs to the Long War. The assault on Canticle City became legend among the traitor legions. Abaddon gathered warriors from multiple sources for the attack. Former Sons of Horus, who still believed in the possibility of redemption, answered his call. But more remarkably, Abaddon recruited from other legions as well. Iskandar Khayon, a sorcerer of the Thousand Suns who had his own reasons for seeking change, pledged his service. Telemachon Lyrus, a champion from the Emperor's Children itself, joined Abaddon's cause, drawn by the first captain's vision and strength. Leovin Euchris, a warrior of the World Eaters, brought his fury and his warband to the assault. Even a fallen angel named Vortigern, who had fought in the Legion Wars following the heresy, recognized that Abaddon represented something worth fighting for. These warriors, drawn from different legions and different philosophies, became the founding members of the Ezekarian, Abaddon's inner circle of sworn brothers. Their very diversity demonstrated the new principle that would define the Black Legion. Loyalty to Abaddon and to the Long War superseded all other allegiances. It did not matter if a warrior had once served the Thousand Suns or the World Eaters or any other legion. What mattered was dedication to the goal of destroying the Imperium and claiming the galaxy for those who had earned it through 10,000 years of struggle. The assault on Canticle City succeeded beyond expectation. Abaddon and his Ezekarian smashed through the Emperor's Children's defences, each warrior demonstrating abilities that made them legends in their own right. When they reached the clone of Horus, kept in stasis by Fabius Bile as a twisted trophy and experiment, Abaddon personally destroyed it. The symbolism was unmistakable. He rejected Horus, rejected the idea that the War Master's legacy could be reclaimed or recreated through cloning or imitation. The past was dead, and any who clung to it would share its fate. With the clone destroyed, Abaddon gathered the surviving sons of Horus before him and declared the birth of something new. They would no longer be the sons of Horus, would no longer carry the shame of that name. They would paint their armour black, rejecting the sea green that had marked them since the days of the Great Crusade. They would trim it in gold, claiming the right to inherit the glory that had been promised but never delivered. They would be the Black Legion, servants not of any one chaos god but of chaos undivided, warriors who used the dark gods rather than being used by them. Most importantly, Abaddon declared himself the rightful heir to the title of War Master, not because he was Horus's genetic son or spiritual successor, but because he had proven himself worthy through action. He had done what Horus could not, had maintained his will and purpose in the face of Chaos's corrupting influence. He had united warriors from different legions under a single banner, had shown them a path forward when all seemed lost. The Ezekarian supported this claim, and their support mattered because they were champions in their own right, warriors whose skill and power were undeniable. But declaring oneself War Master and actually claiming the title were two different things entirely. The Death Guard warlord Thegas Daravek emerged as Abaddon's primary rival in the struggle for dominance within the Eye of Terror. Daravek commanded significant forces and had his own ambitions to lead the traitor legions. He saw Abaddon's declaration as presumption, as the desperate posturing of a warrior from a broken legion trying to claim authority he had not earned. The conflict between them would shape the early years of the Black Legion's existence, testing whether Abaddon's vision could survive contact with the brutal reality of the Legion Wars. The struggle against Daravek demonstrated Abaddon's understanding of power in ways that mere battlefield prowess never could. He did not simply marshal his forces and attack his rival head-on, though violence certainly played its role. Instead, Abaddon worked systematically to undermine Daravek's support, to isolate the Death Guard warlord from potential allies, to make it clear that opposing the Black Legion carried costs that outweighed any potential benefits. He made pacts with demon princes, negotiated with warp entities, and struck deals with other powerful warlords throughout the Eye of Terror. Most significantly, Abaddon began bringing the demon primarchs themselves to acknowledge his claim. These were beings of immense power, the ascended forms of the traitor primarchs who had fully embraced chaos. They should have been untouchable, should have been beyond any mere Space Marine's ability to command or even negotiate with his equals. Yet Abaddon approached them not as a supplicant, but as the inheritor of a position they themselves had once respected. One by one, through combinations of threat, bargaining, and demonstration of power, he secured their acknowledgement of his authority. The moment that cemented Abaddon's claim came when he brought Magnus the Red to his knees. The demon primarch of the Thousand Suns, one of the most powerful psychers in the galaxy, was forced to bow before the new War Master through the combined might of Abaddon and Iskandar Khayon. The psychic duel that achieved this feat became known throughout the Eye of Terror, and it earned Khayon the title of Kingbreaker. More importantly, it proved that Abaddon commanded power sufficient to enforce his will even upon the mightiest servants of chaos. With the demon primarchs acknowledging him, with the Ezekarian as his inner circle, with growing numbers of warbands pledging themselves to his banner, Abaddon finally achieved the authority to truly call himself Warmaster. But he understood that authority meant nothing without action, that the traitor legions would only follow him as long as he led them toward meaningful goals. The long war that Horus had started remained unfinished, and Abaddon intended to complete it. But he would do so on his terms, following a strategy that learned from the heresy's failures. The preparation for the First Black Crusade revealed the depth of Abaddon's planning. He would not simply gather an army and throw it at the Imperium's defences. Instead, he would pursue specific objectives that served a larger strategic purpose. In this case, that purpose centered on acquiring the demon sword Draconian, a weapon of incomparable power that had been imprisoned in the Tower of Silence. The sword had a will of its own, had consumed countless warriors who tried to claim it, but Abaddon had prepared himself through his years wandering the Eye of Terror. He knew the risk, but he also knew what the blade represented. When the First Black Crusade erupted from the Eye of Terror in the late 31st millennium, approximately 500 years after the heresy's end, it caught the Imperium completely unprepared. The forces of chaos had been relatively quiet during the centuries of the Great Scouring, as the traitor legions fought among themselves for dominance. Now they emerged united under Abaddon's banner, and the destruction they wrought shocked even hardened Imperial commanders. Worlds burned by the dozen. Entire systems fell silent. The invasion pushed deep into Imperial space, seeming unstoppable. But Abaddon's true objective was not conquest, at least not yet. While his forces ravaged Imperial territory, spreading terror and tying down military assets, Abaddon himself led a strike force to the world of Urulun, and from there to the Tower of Silence. The assault was brutal, costing many warriors their lives. But Abaddon reached the chamber where Draconian was imprisoned. The demon weapon tried to dominate him, to consume his will, and add him to the countless souls it had already devoured. But Abaddon had trained for this moment, had prepared himself through years of exposure to chaos without surrender. He took the blade and made it his own, claiming a weapon that would serve him for the next 10,000 years. The acquisition of Draconian elevated Abaddon from powerful warlord to truly legendary figure. The sword was not simply a weapon, but a symbol of his mastery over chaos itself. If he could claim and wield such a blade without being destroyed, what else might he accomplish? Warriors throughout the Eye of Terror recognized the significance, and many who had remained neutral in the struggle between Abaddon and his rivals now pledged themselves to the Black Legion. The First Black Crusade ended when Abaddon was finally cornered by forces led by Sigismund himself, the first captain of the Imperial Fists and the Emperor's champion. Sigismund was ancient by this point, having fought in the heresy and survived the millennia since through sheer will and the blessings of the Emperor. The duel between them was one of the greatest martial contests in Imperial history. Sigismund's skill was legendary, his faith unshakable, but time had diminished his physical abilities. Abaddon, enhanced by the power of chaos and wielding Draconian, eventually prevailed. The death of Sigismund sent shockwaves through the Imperium, for he had been a symbol of resistance against chaos, proof that the old warriors of the heresy era still stood guard. Yet Abaddon himself was gravely wounded in the duel, nearly killed by the ancient champion. The Ezekarian decided that knowledge of how close their warmaster had come to death could not be allowed to spread, and they systematically eliminated any witnesses to the combat. This secrecy preserved the image of Abaddon's invincibility, an image that would become increasingly important as the Black Legion grew. The Imperium's response to the First Black Crusade was to fortify the Cadian Gate. The fortress world of Cadia was transformed into the ultimate bastion against chaos, and the naval port at Bellis Corona was established to provide fleet support. These defences would become the primary obstacle to any future invasions from the Eye of Terror, but Abaddon viewed them not as barriers but as targets. Each Black Crusade he launched in the subsequent millennia would test those defences, would probe for weaknesses, would accomplish specific objectives that served his long-term planning. The Black Legion continued to grow throughout the centuries following the First Black Crusade. Abaddon's policy of accepting warriors from any legion, from any chapter that turned traitor, from any source that could contribute to the Long War, meant that the Black Legion's numbers constantly increased even as other traitor legions stagnated or diminished. Entire warbands would pledge themselves to Abaddon, painting their armour black and gold and taking up the Legion's iconography. By the 41st millennium, the Black Legion had become the largest of all the traitor legions, numbering perhaps 10 times the size of the Word-Bearers, the next most numerous force. This growth was not merely numerical. The Black Legion's acceptance of diverse warriors meant they possessed capabilities that other legions lacked. Sorcerers from the Thousand Suns, Berserkers from the World Eaters, Plague Marines from the Death Guard, Noise Marines from the Emperor's Children, all could be found fighting under Abaddon's banner. The Black Legion embraced chaos undivided, allowing warriors dedicated to specific gods to maintain their devotion while serving the larger cause. This flexibility gave them tactical options that more specialized legions could not match. The Black Legion's structure evolved to accommodate this diversity. Abaddon maintained the Ezekarian as his inner circle of trusted lieutenants, but below them existed a complex hierarchy of warbands and champions. The Chosen of Abaddon, 4 great commanders each devoted to one of the Chaos Gods, led major military operations. Countless smaller warlords commanded their own forces, operating semi-independently, but always answering Abaddon's call when a Black Crusade was declared. This loose organization allowed the Black Legion to remain flexible and adaptive, to pursue multiple objectives simultaneously, to be everywhere and nowhere. The symbolism of the Black Legion became inseparable from the concept of chaos's threat to the Imperium. When Imperial citizens thought of traitor Marines, they pictured black armour trimmed in gold. When commanders prepared defences against chaos incursions, they planned for tactics pioneered by the Black Legion. The Legion's iconography. The Eye of Horus rendered in black and gold became synonymous with damnation itself. This transformation from the broken sons of Horus to the preeminent traitor legion was complete by the time of the 13th Black Crusade. What separated Abaddon from every other Chaos warlord who had emerged since the heresy was not simply his martial prowess or his ability to command loyalty. It was his understanding that true victory required patience, planning, and a willingness to accept apparent defeats as steps toward ultimate triumph. The Black Crusades that followed the first were not random acts of destruction or desperate attempts to reclaim lost glory. They were surgical strikes, carefully calculated operations that served a grand strategy few in the Imperium comprehended until it was far too late. This strategy, known as the Crimson Path, would prove to be the most elaborate and successful military campaign in the 10,000-year history of the Long War. The Crimson Path was built upon a discovery that Abaddon made during his years wandering the Eye of Terror. Throughout the galaxy, particularly in the regions surrounding the Eye, ancient structures existed that predated human civilization. These pylons, as they came to be called, were Necron constructions from the War in Heaven, erected to stabilize reality and prevent the warp from overwhelming the material universe. They functioned as barriers, holding back the tides of chaos even though their creators had long since entered hibernation or moved on to other concerns. Cadia, the fortress world that stood as the primary obstacle to any major chaos incursion, was dotted with these structures. The Imperium knew of their existence but did not understand their true purpose, dismissing them as interesting xenotech artifacts worthy of study but not comprehension. Abaddon understood. He recognized that these pylons were the reason the Eye of Terror remained contained, the reason chaos invasions could be pushed back, the reason the Imperium had survived 10,000 years of assault from within the Eye. Destroy enough of these structures, particularly those on Cadia, and the warp would spill forth unchecked. The Eye of Terror would expand, consuming worlds and systems in its path, creating a highway of unreality that would stretch from the Eye all the way to Terror itself. No fleet could stop the warp itself. No fortress could stand against the dissolution of reality. The Crimson Path would not be walked by armies but by chaos itself, and in its wake would come the forces necessary to bring down the false emperor. But destroying the pylons required more than simply sending armies to smash them. The structures were ancient beyond measure, reinforced by technologies that made them nearly indestructible through conventional means. Worse, any direct assault on the pylons would alert the Imperium to their importance, leading to reinforced defences that would make future attempts impossible. Abaddon needed to work in secret, to destroy pylons across multiple star systems without revealing the pattern, to make each strike seem like just another raid or battle in the endless war between the Imperium and Chaos. This required decades, centuries, even millennia of careful planning and execution. Each Black Crusade after the first served this purpose alongside more obvious objectives. The Second Black Crusade in 597.M32 primarily assaulted Cadia itself, testing the new fortifications the Imperium had erected and establishing the pattern that future crusades would follow. But during that assault, Abaddon invoked rituals on the system's outermost moons that would awaken centuries later, spreading mutagenic plagues and corrupting defenders from within. The assault on the Inquisitorial fortress on Nemesis Tessera freed captured demons, but also allowed Black Legion sorcerers to study Imperial defences and identify weaknesses in the network of strongholds protecting the Cadian Gate. The Fifth Black Crusade demonstrated Abaddon's ability to manipulate even demon princes to serve his purposes. He unleashed Doombreed, the mightiest of Khorne's demon princes, upon Imperial worlds. The devastation was beyond measure, but more importantly it established that Abaddon could command the loyalty of entities that other warlords could only plead with or flee from. The bloodshed also served ritual purposes, saturating certain worlds with death in patterns that would weaken the barriers between reality and the warp. The Imperium recorded these attacks as the savage fury of chaos unleashed, never realizing they were following designs laid down by Abaddon's sorcerers. The Seventh Black Crusade struck at St. Gerstal's Shrine World, and here the true subtlety of Abaddon's planning became evident. While forces led by Demon Prince Talamin assaulted Cadia in what appeared to be a major offensive, the real objective was the destruction of St. Gerstal's tomb and the remains within. A prophecy written on the tomb claimed the saint would rise again when the Eye of Darkness opened for the last time. Whether this prophecy had any truth to it, Abaddon could not allow even the possibility of such a figure emerging to oppose him when the Crimson Path reached its completion. The tomb was destroyed, the remains scattered, and the Imperium recorded the attack as a failed attempt to breach Cadia, never realizing the true victory Chaos had achieved. The Eighth Black Crusade revealed the depth of Abaddon's long-term thinking. The Black Legion engaged in what was called the Skull Gather, ritual sacrifices performed across multiple worlds with specific numbers of victims arranged in specific patterns. Hundreds of inquisitorial adepts went insane trying to break the cipher, trying to understand the meaning behind the deaths. Imperial forces pursued Abaddon's fleet across the sector, believing they were preventing some immediate catastrophe. Only after the crusade ended did anyone realize that the real objective had been the destruction of several planets that were part of the same pylon network as Cadia. Beneath the surface of these worlds, machines older than the Imperium maintained the barriers against the warp. When those worlds burned, those machines failed, and the network weakened imperceptibly. One world alone would mean nothing. Dozens of worlds over millennia meant everything. The Gothic War, known officially as the 12th Black Crusade, represented one of Abaddon's most ambitious operations before the final assault on Cadia. The objective was to capture the Blackstone fortresses, ancient weapons of incredible power that the Eldari called the Talismans of Vol. These massive constructs, leftovers from the War in Heaven, possessed the ability to manipulate gravitational and warp energies on a scale that dwarfed even the most powerful Imperial weapons. In the hands of Chaos, they could devastate entire systems, or more importantly for Abaddon's purposes, destroy the pylons that held back the warp. The war lasted over 2 decades and involved some of the largest fleet actions since the Heresy. The Eldari, recognizing the threat, actually allied with the Imperium to prevent Abaddon from claiming all 6 fortresses. The combined forces managed to destroy several of the constructs, but Abaddon escaped with 2 Blackstone fortresses under his control. The Imperium celebrated this as a victory, having prevented Chaos from claiming all the ancient weapons. They failed to understand that Abaddon had never expected to capture all 6. 2 was sufficient for his needs. 2 could destroy Cadia when the time came. Throughout these crusades, the Black Legion's reputation grew not just through military victories, but through the psychological impact of their very existence. When a Black Crusade was declared, entire sectors mobilized for war. Space Marine chapters redeployed, Imperial Guard regiments were raised and shipped to threatened zones, and the Adeptus Mechanicus prepared their war machines for the inevitable clash. The economic and military strain of responding to each crusade weakened the Imperium gradually, diverting resources that might have been used to expand or consolidate territory. Each crusade cost the Imperium decades of development, thousands of worlds scarred or destroyed, and millions of warriors dead. Even when pushed back, Abaddon achieved his objectives, and the toll accumulated. The Black Legion itself evolved with each crusade. Where other traitor legions remained relatively static in their organization and tactics, the Black Legion adapted and incorporated new elements constantly. When Space Marine chapters turned traitor, they were absorbed into the Black Legion's ranks, bringing their specialized knowledge and equipment. When Renegade Guard regiments fled into the Eye of Terror, they became auxiliary forces serving under Black Legion champions. The Dark Mechanicus found patronage under Abaddon's banner, providing increasingly sophisticated weapons and maintaining the ancient ships of the Legion's fleet. By the time of the 13th Black Crusade, the Black Legion's fleet was comparable in size to entire Imperial Navy battle fleets. 7 battleships, 13 heavy cruisers, 23 cruiser squadrons, and 30 escort squadrons answered Abaddon's call. The vengeful spirit itself had been transformed over the millennia, its fusion of Imperial and Chaos technology making it one of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. The Planet Killer, that dreaded weapon capable of destroying entire worlds, served as Abaddon's ultimate threat against any system that resisted. And the 2 Blackstone fortresses, renamed Will of Eternity, and the Second Fortress, whose name was lost to Imperial records, provided firepower beyond anything the Imperium could match. The preparation for the 13th Black Crusade was unlike anything that had come before. Abaddon called in every favour, invoked every pact, and made promises to entities that should not have accepted his word. The demon Primarchs themselves pledged forces to the assault. Magnus the Red, Mortarion, even Angron were rumoured to have given their blessings to the venture. Warbands from every traitor legion answered the call, setting aside their usual conflicts in recognition that this crusade represented the culmination of 10,000 years of struggle. The forces assembled in the Eye of Terror numbered in the millions, supported by demon legions beyond counting, all unified under Abaddon's command. The timing was crucial. The Imperium in the late 41st millennium was stretched thin, fighting threats on every front. The Tyranid hive fleets devoured worlds in the Eastern Fringe. The Tau Empire expanded despite Imperial resistance. Orc Wars erupted across multiple sectors. The opening of the Great Rift on Vigilus drew resources away from traditional strongholds. Internal conflicts, from heretical uprisings to rogue psychers, strained the Adeptus Arbites and local planetary defense forces. The Imperium had survived 10,000 years through overwhelming numbers and strategic depth, but now those advantages were compromised. Abaddon had chosen his moment perfectly. The crusade began not with a single massive assault, but with dozens of splinter fleets emerging from the Eye of Terror simultaneously. Space hulks laden with chaos forces crashed into orbital defences around key worlds. Demon incursions erupted on planets that should have been secure. Traitor Guard regiments revealed themselves, rising up against their loyalist comrades. The entire region surrounding the Cadian Gate descended into chaos within solar hours. Imperial commanders struggled to establish coherent defensive lines when attacks came from every direction at once. Typhus led Death Guard forces into the Agrippina sector, bringing his plagues and demon engines against worlds ill-prepared for such horrors. The fighting devolved into brutal trench warfare as defenders struggled to contain the corruption spreading through their ranks. The Emperor's Children, Night Lords, and Alpha Legion launched raids across other sectors, each strike calculated to draw defenders away from Cadia itself. The Howling Griffins nearly lost their entire chapter, attempting to contain Typhus's advance. Blood Angels clashed with the largest horde of World Eaters seen since the Heresy, the Berserkers revelling in carnage that painted entire hive cities red. Through this maelstrom, Abaddon led the main thrust toward Cadia itself. The outer defences of the Cadian system crumbled before the onslaught. Prison worlds fell first, their populations either slaughtered or corrupted into service. The Chaos Fleet overwhelmed Admiral Quarren's forces through sheer weight of numbers. After 3 days of desperate void combat, the majority of the Imperial fleet in the Cadian system had been crippled or destroyed. Cadia's orbital defences found themselves under assault from forces they had no hope of stopping. The bombardment that followed shook the very foundations of Cadia's fortress cities. Lance strikes and macrocannon fire rained down for solar hours without pause. The Cadian shock troopers, legendary for their discipline and martial skill, held their positions even as the world shook beneath their feet. But when the bombardment ceased and the invasion began, Even they recognized they faced an enemy beyond anything in their experience. Millions of Chaos cultists. Traitor Guard and Heretic Astartes descended upon Cadia's surface. Demons tore their way into reality wherever blood had been spilled. The Khazars, those great fortress cities that had stood for millennia, became battlegrounds where every street was contested and every building held until it collapsed. Yet the defenders held. Reinforcements arrived from across the Imperium, Space Marine chapters answering the call for aid. The Space Wolves and Dark Angels, ancient rivals, fought side by side against Typhus and the Death Guard. The Crimson Fists launched desperate assaults to reclaim lost positions. St. Celestine herself manifested, leading the Sisters of Battle in charges that drove back demon hordes through sheer faith and fury. For a time, it seemed the defense might hold, that Cadia would stand as it had stood against every previous assault. Then Erebus enacted his ritual. The Word-Bearer, architect of the original heresy, had prepared for this moment across decades. Through the sacrifice of millions across the war-torn sectors, he summoned warp storms that engulfed entire systems. The Mandeville points that allowed safe warp travel became inaccessible. Reinforcements could no longer reach Cadia. Supply lines were cut. The defenders were alone, surrounded by enemies beyond counting, with no hope of relief. The battle for Casa Craf became the focal point of Cadia's defense. This single fortress city held the key to the pylon network beneath Cadia's surface. Abaddon recognized that simply destroying the surface structures would not be sufficient. The pylons extended deep into the planet's crust. Their power sources ancient and incredibly resilient. To truly shatter the network required accessing the control mechanisms buried far below. Casa Craf stood above the largest concentration of these mechanisms, and so it became the place where Cadia's fate would be decided. The Imperial defence of Casa Craf represented some of the finest moments in the history of the Astra Militarum. Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed, tactical genius without equal, orchestrated a defence that should have been impossible. He moved regiments like pieces on a game board, always appearing where the enemy least expected, always turning Abaddon's numerical superiority against itself. When positions became untenable, he ordered withdrawals that saved lives while maintaining defensive integrity. When opportunities arose, he launched counterattacks that bought crucial time. For weeks, Creed held the impossible line, but even genius has limits. The Elysian Fields, a killing ground outside Casa Craf's main gates, became the site of the bloodiest engagement in Cadia's history. Hundreds of thousands died in combat so intense that the ground itself became saturated with blood and bodies. Titans clashed with greater demons. Bane blades traded fire with demon engines. The sky burned with the energies unleashed by the combatants below. When the battle finally ended, Casa Craf had fallen, and Abaddon's forces pushed into the tunnels that led to the pylon controls. The final battle beneath Cadia's surface pitted the greatest champions of both sides against each other in close quarters that negated numerical superiority. Abaddon himself led the Black Legion's Bringers of Despair, his Terminator-armoured bodyguard, against defenders that included St. Celestine, Inquisitor Greyfax, Space Wolves warriors, and Ursarkar Creed himself. The combat was beyond brutal, transcending normal warfare into something almost mythic. Abaddon wielded Drachnian with terrible skill, each swing of the demon blade tearing through power armor and flesh alike. Celestine's faith burned bright enough to drive back demons through presence alone. The tunnels became charnel houses where heroes and monsters died by the dozens. Then Belisarius Cael and Treason the Infinite activated their modifications to the pylon network. The ancient Necron technology surged to life with power it had not wielded since the War in Heaven. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for Chaos. Demons began to dissolve, their connection to the warp severed. Psychers collapsed, their powers rendered useless. Even Celestine found herself weakened, her divine strength faltering as the pylons pushed back the Immaterium itself. For a brief moment, the Imperium stood on the verge of a victory that would have changed everything. But the pylons did not discriminate. While they weakened Chaos, they also affected anything touched by the warp. The Space Wolves Wolfen, those warriors transformed by the Canis Helix, felt the pylons' power draining their strength. The Grey Knights found their psychic abilities suppressed. Even the faithful felt the absence of the Emperor's light, as the pylons pushed back all warp energy without distinction. And in that moment of confusion, with Chaos weakened but Imperial forces equally disrupted, the Black Legion struck. Abaddon's Terminator armor and enhanced physiology allowed him to fight through the pylon's effects better than any demons could. He cut down Celestine even in her weakened state, the demon blade Draconian hungrily drinking in her essence. Creed himself confronted the Warmaster in single combat, knowing he could not win but buying time for others to escape. The Lord Castellan lost an arm to Abaddon's claws but managed to distract the Warmaster long enough for Inquisitor Greyfax to lead a counterattack. The confusion allowed Celestine to revive, her faith reigniting, and she impaled Abaddon from behind with her own blade. Horribly wounded, bleeding from injuries that would have killed a normal Space Marine instantly, Abaddon was forced to teleport back to the vengeful spirit. His closest lieutenants feared the Warmaster might actually die from his wounds. But Abaddon had planned for even this contingency. Even in defeat he would achieve victory. The Will of Eternity hung in orbit above Cadia, its crew dead or dying from the Imperial assault that had finally disabled the Blackstone Fortress. Morketh, the fortress's commander, and one of Abaddon's most trusted agents, pleaded with the Warmaster to spare the ancient construct. Given time, she could restore its power, could make it a weapon once more. But Abaddon had other plans. He admitted to Morketh that he had grown too fond of her, had revealed too much of himself, and that made her a liability. In a moment of genuine emotion, rare for the Warmaster, he apologized before cutting the connection and ordering the Will of Eternity redirected into Cadia's surface. The impact was apocalyptic. Fragments of the Blackstone Fortress, each the size of mountains, struck Cadia with kinetic force beyond any weapon in the Imperial arsenal. The resulting earthquake shattered fortress cities across the planet. But worse was the effect on the pylon network. The structures, ancient and powerful as they were, could not withstand the tectonic devastation. They failed, all at once, and the barrier holding back the Eye of Terror collapsed. The warp spilled forth across Cadia's surface in a wave of unreality that dissolved matter and sanity alike. Those defenders who remained, Creed's 8th, Cadian holding their positions to the last, found themselves facing not just enemies but the breakdown of existence itself. The evacuation became a desperate flight from a world being consumed by the Immaterium. Only a fraction of Cadia's population escaped, perhaps 3 million from a world of billions. Lord Castellan Creed himself was listed as missing, presumed dead, though rumours would later emerge that he had been captured by the forces of Chaos for purposes unknown. But Abaddon cared nothing for individual prisoners or escaped survivors. His objective had been achieved. Cadia, the linchpin of the pylon network, was gone. The Eye of Terror began expanding immediately, no longer constrained by the Necron technology that had held it in check for millions of years. The expansion did not stop at the Cadian Gate. It continued, spreading across the galaxy in a wave that would become known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift. The Great Rift tore through the Imperium from north to south, splitting it nearly in half. Entire sectors found themselves cut off from Terra, the light of the Astronomicon dimmed or lost entirely. Warp travel became impossible in many regions as warp storms raged unchecked. On world after world, reality weakened and demons poured through. The age of the Dark Imperium had begun, and it was Abaddon's Black Legion that had birthed it. The achievement was beyond anything any Chaos Warlord had accomplished in 10,000 years. Horus had come close to taking Terra but ultimately failed. The other Daemon Primarchs had launched their own attacks but been turned back. Countless lesser champions had tried and died in the attempt. Only Abaddon, through millennia of careful planning, through the execution of the Crimson Path strategy that few had even realized existed, had succeeded in fundamentally altering the balance of power in the galaxy. The Black Legion did not rest on this achievement. With the Great Rift opened, with the Imperium reeling from the catastrophe, Abaddon led his forces deeper into Imperial space. The collected remains of Cadia's shattered pylons were stored aboard Black Legion warships and deployed at strategic locations to disrupt warp routes leading to Terra. The Ultramar campaign saw Black Legion forces striking at the realm of the resurrected Primarch Robuta Guilliman, testing the strength of the Imperium's new leader. Everywhere the Black Legion appeared, worlds burned and systems fell into darkness. The Black Legion had become more than just the largest traitor legion. They represented the inevitable triumph of chaos, the proof that the Long War could be won, that the Imperium could be brought low. When other Chaos forces launched their own attacks, they did so emboldened by what Abaddon had achieved. When warlords gathered warbands and declared their own crusades, they painted their armour black and gold, claiming association with the Legion that had cracked the galaxy itself. The iconography of the Black Legion, that stylized Eye of Horus in black and gold, became synonymous with Chaos's greatest victories. This supremacy was not simply a matter of military might or strategic genius. The Black Legion represented an idea, a philosophy of how to wage the long war. Where other legions remained trapped by their devotion to individual gods or their hatred of specific enemies, the Black Legion embraced chaos undivided and focused solely on the destruction of the Imperium. Where other warbands squabbled over resources or honour, the Black Legion maintained discipline and purpose. Where other champions sought demonic ascension or personal glory, Abaddon pursued victory through whatever means necessary while maintaining his humanity and will. This made the Black Legion dangerous in ways that more powerful, but less focused forces could never match. A demon primarchs might be individually stronger than Abaddon, might command greater supernatural power, but the demon primarchs were constrained by their nature. They served their gods and could only manifest in real space under specific conditions. Abaddon served no master except his own will, could travel anywhere, and coordinated campaigns across the entire galaxy. His mortal nature, which seemed like weakness compared to demonic ascension, was actually his greatest strength. The Ezekarian exemplified this principle. These warriors, drawn from different legions and following different gods, united under Abaddon's banner because they recognized that his way offered the best chance for ultimate victory. Iskander Khayon, the sorcerer powerful enough to bring Magnus the Red to his knees, could have pursued his own agenda, but chose to serve as Abaddon's blade. Falcus Kibre, the Widowmaker, commanded the Bringers of Despair with loyalty that transcended the usual treachery of chaos. The fact that such warriors freely chose to follow Abaddon spoke to something beyond mere power or fear. The Black Legion's acceptance of warriors from any source, any legion, any chapter that turned traitor, created a meritocracy within chaos. A champion who proved themselves through skill and dedication could rise to command warbands regardless of their origin. This contrasted sharply with other traitor legions, where advancement often depended on lineage or devotion to specific gods. The Black Legion offered opportunity to the ambitious, purpose to the vengeful, and belonging to the lost. It was, in a twisted way, the fulfillment of the original imperial truth that the Emperor had preached, the idea that humanity could transcend gods and superstition through strength of will and dedication to a cause. Of course, the cause was the complete destruction of the Imperium and the triumph of chaos, but that was merely perspective. By the opening of the 42nd millennium, the Black Legion stood unchallenged as the face of chaos in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. When Imperial propagandists wanted to show the traitor Marines as the ultimate enemy, they depicted black armour trimmed in gold. When Space Marine chapters prepared neophytes for the possibility of facing heretics, they trained them against tactics pioneered by the Black Legion. When Inquisitors investigated chaos incursions, they looked for signs of Black Legion involvement as the indicator that a minor raid might be the precursor to something far worse. The psychological impact of this reputation cannot be overstated. The mere rumour of Black Legion forces in a sector could cause panic among Imperial commanders. Worlds would evacuate populations and prepare for siege at the first report of black and gold armour. Space Marine chapters would redeploy entire companies based on intelligence suggesting Abaddon's involvement. The Black Legion had become the boogeyman of the 41st millennium, the threat that kept Imperial officers awake at night and made planetary governors fortify defences that should have been sufficient years ago. This fear was entirely justified. The Black Legion had proven definitively and conclusively that they could achieve objectives the Imperium had thought impossible. They had destroyed Cadia. They had split the galaxy with a great rift. They had reduced the Imperium from a galaxy-spanning empire to two separate realms barely maintaining contact with each other. In the Dark Imperium, those worlds cut off from Terra's light, the Black Legion rampaged almost unopposed, claiming systems and establishing strongholds that would take centuries to dislodge, even if the Imperium could spare the forces to attempt it. The transformation from the broken sons of Horus to the unstoppable Black Legion was complete. Where once they had been failures who fled from Terra in shame, now they were the conquerors who had succeeded where Horus himself had failed. Where once they had been despised by other traitor legions, now they commanded respect and led the united forces of chaos. Where once they had been just another warband struggling to survive in the Eye of Terror, now they were the architects of the Imperium's greatest catastrophe since the heresy itself. Abaddon's vision, forged in the aftermath of humiliating defeat, had proven correct. The path to victory did not require becoming a puppet of the dark gods. It required using chaos as a tool while maintaining one's will and purpose. It required planning that spanned millennia rather than seeking immediate gratification. It required accepting that some battles would be lost if those losses served larger objectives. And most importantly, it required the willingness to completely abandon the past, to reject the names and honors that had defined them before, and to forge something new from the ashes of failure. The Black Legion became the face of chaos because they embodied everything that made chaos truly dangerous. Not the mindless fury of Khorne, though they could channel that fury when needed. Not the scheming ambition of Tzeentch, though they planned with subtlety that would make the Changer of Ways proud. Not the despair of Nurgle or the excess of Slaanesh, though both had their place in the Legion's tactics. The Black Legion represented chaos undivided in its purest form, the combination of all the Dark God's gifts without the constraints of devotion to any single patron. They represented something more fundamental than any single aspect of chaos. They represented the idea that the Long War could be won, that 10,000 years of effort were not wasted, that the Imperium's seemingly eternal dominance could be shattered. They proved that ambition backed by planning and will could overcome forces that seemed insurmountable. They demonstrated that loyalty to a cause and leader who actually deserved that loyalty could unite even the fractious forces of chaos toward common purpose. In a galaxy of endless war where stagnation and entropic decline seemed inevitable, the Black Legion offered the promise of change, of evolution, of ultimate victory. For the servants of chaos, they were inspiration and proof that their gods had not abandoned them. For the Imperium, they were the nightmare that could not be banished, the enemy that learned from every defeat and came back stronger, the darkness that would eventually consume all light. The black armor trimmed in gold had become more than heraldry. It was a statement of intent, a promise of destruction, a symbol recognized across the galaxy as the mark of those who would not stop, would not surrender, would not accept anything less than the complete overthrow of the Imperium of man. The Eye of Horus staring from their armor was not the symbol of a failed Primarch, but the symbol of 10,000 years of hatred crystallized into purpose. The Black Legion had become the face of chaos because they were the best at what chaos did. They destroyed hope, corrupted the faithful, shattered strongholds, and proved that nothing in the Imperium was truly safe or eternal. They were the culmination of every dark impulse, every betrayal, every moment of weakness that had plagued humanity since the heresy. And under Abaddon's leadership they would continue their long war until either the Imperium fell or they themselves were destroyed. Given what they had already accomplished, given the great rift they had opened, and the dark Imperium they had created, it was becoming increasingly clear which outcome was more likely. The black and gold did not just represent the Black Legion anymore, it represented the future of the galaxy. A future where the light of terror finally gutted out and eternal darkness reigned supreme.